think the other thing that law firms don't do is actually ask people at quite an early stage in their career, do you want to be a leader? The majority of lawyers just want to be lawyers. That's something I learned. That's what we train to do. We spend a lot of time, energy training, and we just want to actually be the best lawyer in our particular field, giving the best service to our clients. There will be the odd one or two who say, I want to actually be look at leadership. And it's picking those early and then nurturing and developing them and being prepared to say to them, actually, you're not up to it. Go back to the law job. But really identifying your younger aspiring leaders, especially with the world changing so quickly now. You want entrepreneurial leaders who are thinking differently and actually are quite excited by it.
Oh, welcome back to the Catch Up podcast, where we explore strategies, stories, and insights that help law firms thrive in a fast changing world. I'm your host, Graham Moore, and today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. My guest is Robert Camp. Robert is known for his pioneering leadership in the legal sector, particularly from his time as managing partner at Stevens Scone, where he helped redefine what law firm ownership, leadership, and culture can look like. So Robert and I first crossed paths years ago when I was working for Stevens Scone as a supplier, and I've always been struck by his forward-thinking approach. So today we're going to dive into some big topics: ownership structures in law firms, what great leadership actually looks like in practice, and how law firms can align their values with their business strategy. So Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Graham. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, should be a good conversation. So let's start off ownership in law firms. This is a subject that always really fascinates me. You're well known for leading Stephen Scone's transition to an employee ownership model, which was, and I think still is, pretty rare in the legal sector.
Yeah.
Can you take us back to that moment? What was the spark that led you to challenge the traditional partnership model?
Wow, that's a big first question. So when I took over as managing partner, I had a real ambition to want to create a different type of law firm. And one of the things I wanted to do to make us different was to embrace the John Lewis profit share model. So we even called it the John Lewis project when we were going through this, because of course no other law firms and very few professional service firms had even gone down this route. Why did I want to do that? Well, all of the research that I'd read and spoken to people about in business outside of the sector was that if you can engage your staff, they'll give better customer client service. And what better way to engage your staff than to actually have them as owners and a proper share of the profit, not just relying on bonus structures ad hoc or very complicated, which most professional service firms seem to like creating. And also, it meant that everybody in the business, from people chasing the debts to people answering the phone, to, in fact, at one stage we had some on the books cleaners. So, on the books cleaners for one of our offices could actually benefit in the success of the firm. So that was the rationale behind it. It took a long time to achieve it, but I'm sure we'll come on to some other questions.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting you said that you looked outside the legal sector, and that's one of the things that's really interested me because often what I find is a lot of the external thinking within law firms tends to come when people come in from the outside, whereas you're an insider, you're a lawyer
Yeah.
practicing within the firm, but you consciously looked outside for inspiration.
Yeah, it was, and it was something that I wanted to stretch myself, my learning, and one of the great ways of doing that was to look outside of the sector, in particular, innovation and customer service. But also, the other thing I used to do was go on conferences I had no right to attend because I wanted to hear what the bigger law firms were doing. So I would quite often sign up for a top 50 law firm conference in London because I just wanted to hear what they were thinking. So I was always pushing myself and stretching myself to get different input, both from within the sector, but a lot outside of the sector.
So that curiosity really paid off.
Yeah, yeah, and so much of the stuff that we did was nuanced from stuff I picked up mainly from outside the sector, and then we honed it as to how we could make it work at Stephen Scone.
So most law firms still follow the traditional equity partnership structure. What would you say the biggest limitations of that model, and why do you think firms are so reluctant to change?
I think reluctance to change because the when you make partner, you make partner. So why would you want to change something that you've been aspiring to and working for many years, and also getting the rewards that you get as a partner? But the first question, the biggest, what's the biggest limitations? I think there has to be a seismic change because there's a lot of junior lawyers who just do not see equity partnership as what they want, or they don't know that that's what they want, I think is a fairer way of putting it. The workforce is much more transient. When I joined Stephen Scone, 33, that was it. Unless something dramatic changed, you were in for the duration, and you knew that you were going to progress up and ultimately, hopefully, become partner. Now, younger lawyers are much more likely to think, well, I'll join a firm for 2 or 3 years and then I might have a gap year. I read the other day that lots of professional youngsters, 20, late 20s, early 30s, are going to places like Australia. So I think law firms have to start thinking about how are they going to get the next crop of leaders who actually have a stake in the business. And it's going to be a challenge. Equally, the other challenge for successful law firms, in particular the ones that have incorporated, where they've created capital value, because of course traditionally law firms didn't create capital value. You put your capital in and you got the capital out at the end, and the return on investment was the increased profits share. But if you're actually a shareholder creating capital value, how are you going to sell that to your junior lawyers if you've actually created very, very enhanced capital value? They won't be able to afford it. A lot of younger lawyers don't want to take on debt. They've got enough debt from student loans, mortgages. They're paying a fortune in rent. And I think the landscape is changing, and people just need to be aware of that. It's the traditional model works for some firms, but not for all firms. And I think it's just thinking what's best for our fit.
Yeah. Okay. So for firms that might be listening and thinking, well, this sounds interesting, but is it right for our firm? What are the key signals do you think that a firm might benefit from an alternative ownership model?
Yeah, I think the key thing is as a collective, what do you want to achieve in the medium to long term? Not personally, but for the organization. So if actually as a collective you say we want to drive capital value and then do an exit, nothing wrong in that. Well, then you wouldn't look at employee ownership, and your whole strategy would be around driving that capital value. If, which quite a lot of the mid-tier firms, I think it's more relevant for mid-tier firms, actually want legacy as what they want to pass on. They want to pass on their incredible client base that firms have, the loyalty that those clients, and also just their position within their community. Then a different form of structure can really work because it preserves what you've created, but also allows the organization to continue to grow, but ring fenced in under the employee ownership scheme, ring fenced as to what the firm can and can't do. So I think it's horses for courses. But what I would say to any group of shareholders or senior partners is what do you personally want your firm to look like in 5 years' time? Do you want it still to be not a traditional firm, but an independent firm, or are you happy to either be consolidated, taken over, or sold.
Okay, and that's as you said earlier, that's inevitably the consequence really of going down the corporate model and building capital value. That there needs to be a sale one day.
Yes, and it can be a sale to a third party or an employee ownership trust, because I know firms where their capital value was so high that there was no way they would get junior partners who could afford it, let alone would want to. And also the payback then would have been much more long term.
So yeah, as you say, horses for courses.
Mm.
Work out what it is that you want, which is sounds obvious, really, when you put it like that, but not necessarily how people think all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's getting the collective to agree what, and I have worked with firms where, they've had those challenging and difficult conversations and people have left because they don't agree with the direction of travel that the majority want. But I think you need to have that discussion. And the way I frame it quite often is, do you want to remain independent? Because some people are happy to lose their independence either completely or through merger acquisition. Others say, no, we want to retain what we've had for 200 years.
Yeah, and there is a lot of tradition within the legal sector of firms that have been around for a long time, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, yeah. And if they're well run, there's nothing wrong in that. You can't just rely on your history, but if you've got a great client base and you're well known, well respected, then that's an asset actually that is worth preserving in cases.
One of the other criticisms sometimes of the partnership model is the management structure and divorcing the ownership and the management of the firm. How have you seen employee ownership affect that, or is it any different?
Um, in theory, it should make it easier because you have a true corporate structure. I think there's a transition period when the previous shareholders, partners, still want a bigger say than they actually should have. But I think it will mature to a true corporate structure where the board of directors, not necessarily lawyers, will be tasked with driving the business, and the would-be partners or previous partners tasked with driving the actual service. So it's separating the driving of the business from driving of the service. And I think it will mature into the more traditional corporate structure. It's always a conundrum for me that most of our commercial clients are corporate structure, and we advise them on a corporate structure, and we advise them of the pros and the cons and the difficulties and the issues that arise. But when we look at our own business as lawyers, we find that a challenge to actually understand, and also we don't want to release that control. But as firms grow, they have to have a much more streamlined management structure. You can't have the old traditional partnership.
Yeah, really. So moving on to leadership, which sort of follows on, I think, from this. So law firms often promote their best lawyers into leadership positions, but technical expertise, as you were just saying, and leadership are very different skill sets. What are the biggest mistakes firms make when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, I'll just correct you. Law firms often, but actually society often.
Yeah,
And you know, so sometimes we look at ourselves too much. But one of the examples I use on this is, the best physics teacher in the secondary school. The results are fantastic. The only way they can really get promotion is to become head of physics, but they might be a terrible people person. And I think that is the biggest mistake. There's two areas: promoting the wrong people purely on their billing or their BD marketing, which can have really bad consequences. So if you look at what the positives of those individuals. If they're suddenly tasked with running a team of 20, their billing is likely to diminish, and their BD marketing rainmaking is likely to be diminished, coupled with the fact that if they're not the right person to be leading the team, you're going to have all of the issues with the team not feeling they're being led properly. So just promoting the biggest billers or the biggest rainmakers is not the best strategy, in my opinion. I always looked at what are people's key strengths and empower and release them to do their key strengths. And I think the other thing that law firms don't do is actually ask people at quite an early stage in their career, do you want to be a leader? The majority of lawyers just want to be lawyers. That's something I learned. That's what we train to do. We spend a lot of time, energy training, and we just want to actually be the best lawyer in our particular field, giving the best service to our clients. There will be the odd one or two who say, I want to actually look at leadership. And it's picking those early and then nurturing and developing them and being prepared to say to them, actually, you're not up to it. Go back to the law job. But really identifying your younger aspiring leaders, especially with the world changing so quickly now. You want entrepreneurial leaders who are thinking differently and actually are quite excited by it. Too often in the past, as you say, we just promoted people because they were supposedly the best lawyer in that team or the firm.
Yeah, and as you say, you're quite right. It's not just law firms. We see it everywhere. I've seen it so many times in my career in technical teams where where the best developer suddenly has a bunch of people to manage, and then suddenly productivity goes through the floor because of they're spending their time doing completely the wrong things. But, so, it's always an interesting one, that, and I think one of the challenges with it I've always seen is almost related to status. It's almost expected that the only way to advance your career is to become a manager and that tree. And if there's no equivalent sort of technical hierarchy, then people almost feel they have to take that route whether they want it or not.
Yeah, and also, Graham, it's remuneration. I would have no problem with a really technical lawyer earning more than a team leader if they were bringing in the work and performing on a fee part, then they should receive more. But equally, if a really good team leader is driving profit, one of the things I did was I said our teams are business units. So, and I used to say to junior partners, do you want to run a business unit? I didn't say, do you want to be a team leader? I said, do you want to run a business unit? And then that would open the conversation. What do you mean by that? Well, you've got to be on top of your numbers. You've got to know, you've got to have difficult conversations. You've got to look at capacity. You've got to look at scaling up. You've got to look at new opportunities. And it was quite interesting because some would be scared by that, which was great. We'd have the conversation. And then the second thing I would say is once you've identified your leaders and you've got them in place, continual learning and development and stretching of them. Again, so often we're very good at black letter law training, but we don't look at the leadership training. You've got to develop your people.
Yeah, very important, that something that we're always trying to do in this business. It's not always as easy. It's to do as you say. So you've had some pretty significant change initiatives in your career. When you're trying to shift a firm's culture or strategy, what's your playbook? What have you found that actually works?
Okay, so the way I will answer that is by giving what went wrong, and then how I worked out what would work. This is with lawyers. So lawyers are notoriously analytical, detailed, and we are very risk averse when it comes to our own businesses. We're great at giving commercial advice to clients. We're not so good at giving that commercial client advice to ourselves. So when I first started, I had the big vision and the big pictures, and that's what I gave the firm and the partners, or the partners in particular. And it was very clear quite quickly it was too big an ambition, and they couldn't see it, or they didn't think we'd ever achieve it. It was just too big. I was all excited, pumped up, and they were thinking, well, we're never how on earth? The first part was going from 9.5 to 15 million within 3 or 4 years, something like that. I could just see them thinking, we're never going to do it. How are we going to do it? So I had to learn very quickly that the way to engage and to bring people with you was, yes, you plant that flag and you say that's where we're going to go to, but this is how we're going to get there, and give them small steps that they can feel safe and secure in doing. So small incremental changes, all leading to the end result, but allowing them to have that bit more sort of security or understanding, and allowing them to look at the detail of those small steps. Because they would say, well, how on earth are we going to get to 15 million? And I didn't have the answers. So that undermined the premise. But if I said, right, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on, say, lockup to generate cash so we can invest that in the business. And then our FD could model it, and she could show the numbers and the small changes that were needed in lockup to release £100,000, which we could then invest in the business. They got it. And it was a real big learning that set your goal, but then create a pathway for them to understand where we're going to. And then the second thing I learned on that was to look back and keep reminding them of where we had come from. And so often we're so busy, we're always looking forward, but actually look back and celebrate those successes. So that's what I would recommend, is work out what your big vision is, tell your team, that's what it is, but then say, but to get there, these are the first 2 or 3 small steps. They don't need to know the whole journey. And every time you achieve one, celebrate it. Look back, say, look, we were here, we're now here. Isn't that great? And then they will feel they'll feel part of be involved in the journey, but they'll also see that things are changing.
Yeah, sound advice. Now, obviously, as you say, you've learned a lot of this, through making mistakes and through the difficult side of things. But are there any particular mentors, experiences, books that have also helped shape your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, there's a few, and I'm a sponge, so I love just picking up information from anywhere and everywhere. One of the great books is James Kerr's Legacy, The Inside Story of the All Blacks. And the reason I think that is so pertinent is actually his book is not about the All Blacks winning. It's about how you create a culture that enables them to win. And so often in business, the strategy is actually the output. Firms make the strategy getting this much profit or getting to this turnover, where actually that is just the output. The strategy is how do you create the environment that get the personnel, the systems, processes to allow you to achieve that output. And I love James Kerr's snippets of how the All Blacks actually achieved that, superiority and mystification, and down to the little things like sweeping the changing rooms at the end of the match, just to keep people grounded. And also, I love the fact, because one of my mantras at Student Scone was I wanted everybody to be proud of the clients that we work for, because then you're likely to give better service. Proud of the work that we did, so that would allow you then to pass work between colleagues. proud of the firm as a whole because I wanted us to be collectively. Yes, we work for one firm, and that really comes out in his book. In that, one of the real drivers of being an All Black is the legacy that once an All Black, you're always an All Black. So actually, it's not what you do on the rugby field as matters. It's how you behave outside of the rugby field, how you leave the legacy for the next generation, and how you represent your country, not on the sporting field. That of course is incredibly key. But I think that is a great way of looking at the business, saying, how can we really change the culture, get buy-in from everybody? And yeah, so that I think that's my favorite book on that aspect. I've got one on leadership, which I can touch on later.
Okay. Yeah, one of my favourites as well. Actually, in my top three, which I compiled for the team the other day.
Yeah, it's very hard to actually pick your favorite or the best one because they all bring different nuances.
Let's shift gears a little bit now and talk something that's really close to my heart, which is aligning business success with values.
Yeah.
So at Catcher, we've just become a certified B Corporation, as have a number of our law firm customers. And you've spoken a lot about the importance of values in business. So what does that look like in practice for law firms?
Yeah, I think, again, this is where it's not cookie cutter. So we went right back to what our purpose was, which then purpose values. What did we want to be as a firm, and who were we? And I think it's really important for firms to actually understand why they as a group, collective group, work and want to work together. And there's nothing right or wrong in what they want to do, because it could be that we want to create as much money as possible in a shorter period of time. That's absolutely fine. But then that will drive the values, which will then drive the people you recruit, and it will drive how you deal with business. So I think it's finding out what it is you want as a collective, not just the financial reward. Why are you doing this? Is it because you want to create a legacy? Is it because you want to look after your environment and your community? Now, there's a whole host of different things. So I think once you can work that out, you then start to build out from that center of your values. And all of the research shows that if you've got your values and beliefs aligned to your strategy, you're more likely to be successful because you'll bring like-minded people into the organization. I think one of the challenges that businesses face is that they sometimes go back to front. So they say, what's our strategy going to be? And then work back to see what the values should be to achieve that strategy. But actually, that's not understanding what the true values of the organization are. You've got to really work out what you are and then build out your strategy from that. And it's very hard to change those embedded underlying values and we didn't change the values. We changed the culture. What we wanted to do was to make the culture more aligned to those values. And that's the hard work, which takes time because the rest of the organization are skeptical to begin with when you start making those changes to culture. Is it genuine? What do they want from us? But over time, they understand that actually all you're doing is embedding your values into the culture. And then that leads to the service that you offer, how you treat your staff, how you treat your clients, and ultimately to the end game strategy. And I think one of the things that I was really proud of was that we showed through our financials and our growth that having what some people would say as soft values, our core purpose was that we were nice. I remember when we first raised that, we thought we can't be nice, we're lawyers. But in my time, we went from 9.4 to 20 million. We doubled the headcount from 150 to over 300, and we doubled the profit. So it showed commercially it worked, but it worked because everything was aligned, not because we were a nice firm. It worked because we were a nice firm. We then made sure our values were aligned to that. And then we made sure that the people we recruited were aligned to that, and actually the clients that we work for. So ultimately, everybody's working to the same goal, aim, and underlying principles.
So we'd say it's not a case of deciding what values you want. It's a case of understanding what values are already there and then
Yeah,
looking with that.
yeah, yeah. I think so, because especially for a mature business. I think if you're doing a startup law firm, then you've got a blank sheet of paper. So yes, what are the values that we want to underpin this business going forward? And as I say, it could be that if you were a startup, we want to create capital value to get an exit in 10 years' time. Nothing wrong with that, because all of your strategy will then be aligned to those values. It may not be what I would want to be part of, and it may be quite a ruthless, eat what you kill sort of atmosphere. But you will attract people who like that, like that. What you'll find is you'll lose the people who don't like it. But if that's your purpose and drive, that's nothing wrong with that. Ours was very much the opposite of that, respecting everybody, empowering everybody, and enabling everybody to fulfill their potential if they wanted to.
Yeah, there is often that perception that doing good and doing well are at odds with each other. That you have to somehow be really hard nosed to be successful. But I think with Stephen's Scone, you've shown that that's not the case. Have you seen other examples of that? Where did you get the confidence and belief that was the right approach to take?
I think reading around it from outside law firms and just, I suppose, understanding that actually everybody had a part to play in that business. And if we could get, you never get 100%, but if we could get 80 to 90% of the whole workforce, all of the people employed working towards the same direction, then it's just common sense that the output will actually be better than if you've only got 50%. So it wasn't a sort of light bulb moment, but it was knowing that that's common sense, but it's common sense to me might not be common sense to other people, but getting and the values. Yes, we had an employee ownership model, but that didn't need to be there to still achieve the success with the right purpose, values, and strategy all aligned. That the employee ownership was the icing on the cake.
Okay. So for firms that want to start embedding purpose more deeply in their culture, where would you say is the best place to start?
Well, for us, it was asking our staff what they thought about our behaviour as owners, because that gave us the litmus test. And then because if they said they weren't happy with the behaviours, then we'll have to ask why. Not as in why we were behaving like that, but what did they want? Why were those behaviours not aligned to what they want? So I think start with that, find out what your staff actually think of your behaviours, and then look at small things. That's the other thing. Changing culture takes time. You've got to engage the staff. So when we were looking at creating the agreed set of values, we actually got the staff to vote on them. I think we had about 15, which we'd honed, a lot of work had gone into getting those 15, and then we put them out to the staff to vote on them. And I think we came up with top 6 or top 5. But again, they felt empowered by that and they felt involved. So I think it's constantly out to the firm so they know what you're going to do, listening to them, letting them have a voice, but not to the extent where they can just decide to go off track about what you're trying to do, and making small steps. I think small steps was the biggest key for me. If you can do the small steps, it's amazing how quickly you can move on the journey you're trying to go on.
And And you said at the start, so I'm going to have to ask you this. You started by asking the staff what they thought of management behaviour. How did that go?
I used the phrase it was brutal, not in a sort of employment law area, but there were just so many disconnects between what the staff wanted and the way we were behaving. And it was all little things like, you know, partners not saying hello to the receptionist when they walked in the morning, partners not knowing the names of their colleagues. So it was little things. I suppose it was all that the staff didn't feel respected, and they putting words in the mouth and they felt more a cog than actually part of the business. And so we did quite a lot on understanding that, and then we came up with our values and behaviours, and then we started to try and make sure people live by those. And then we started to make sure that people we were recruiting would align with those. So, but yeah, it was brutal. It was hard reading, but not in anything sort of, oh dear, we've got to call the employment partner. But it was brutal to hear that how they didn't feel respected by the partnership as a group.
Important lesson that sort of set you on the track then.
Mm.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I'd like to hit you with a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Just short, punchy answers. First thing that comes to mind. So,
Yeah.
what's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
Ooh. It's okay to fail, in particular in law firms where we are so risk averse, and our training is to make sure we win, whether it's commercially or in litigation. So actually, to fail, it's okay to fail, provided you learn from that, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Good caveat on the end of that. What's one habit or routine that's had the biggest impact on your professional life?
I think it would have been celebrating the small wins actually as a habit and routine, making sure. So I tried to make sure I was aware of through various initiatives that we did, that I was aware of the small successes, and it could be anything from a new client or how somebody handled a difficult person in reception, and then celebrating those very small, bar of chocolate. People, we don't need to go over the top with celebration. Yes, if you have a major new client, then you might actually go get a bottle of champagne for the person. But 9 times out of 10, it's small, it's recognition. So by celebrating those small things, it's actually recognizing the individual involved or the individuals involved. So bar of chocolate on their desk, or little things like that would be the biggest sort of routine. Making sure I did it regularly, because of course that's what they're looking at. Is this fair? So you can't do something like that for a period, because then people think it's not fair.
Habit and consistency.
Yeah, yeah.
If you could put a billboard outside every law firm in the UK, what would it say?
Is this right? Okay. Is this for the external world or for the law firm world?
For the law firm to see,
Uh,
for those to see as they go in.
what would it say? Okay, I think it would say something along the lines of, I know you say that your staff are your most valuable asset. Why don't you listen to them? I think that's the sort of thing I would say. Because
Yeah,
firms do, they say, "Oh, our staff are our most valuable asset," and then I would throw it back at them. Well, why don't you listen to them? Why don't you ask them and listen to them?
good advice. What's a common myth about law firm leadership that needs to be busted?
That's a tricky one. That we know it all, actually, and I think surrounding yourself with the right team shows the the firm that you're not the answer to everything, because it's very hierarchical business law. And so becoming managing partner, there is perception, expectation that you know it all, but actually showing them that you don't by surrounding yourself by people who have a better understanding of areas that you're not so good in, finance, non-law stuff. I think that's quite a good myth and to bust. That the other one actually is you'll have been asked or elected to lead the firm. So accept that they want you to lead. They actually want you to lead. They wouldn't have asked you to do it if they weren't confident in your leadership. And that's very hard when you've had the sort of collegiate partnership model where all of your colleagues are on the same level. But it was a wise old partner said to me, actually, about a year or so in, he said, Robert, we want you to lead. That's why we asked you to do it. And that was really empowering for me, because up until then I was thinking, oh, I've got to keep involving all the partners. Some of them have been at the firm much longer than me. Some of them are much better lawyers than me. But he said, no, we want you to lead. So I think that's another good myth to bust, that if you're asked to do it or elected to do it, they actually want you to lead. And then nobody wants to be led to relegation, do they? In a sporting analogy, they want you to succeed. So they want you to lead, and actually deep down, they want you to succeed.
Yeah, good advice. And finally, then, what's one book that every law firm leader should read?
Okay, it's my go-to book all the time. It's this one, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It just shows how, if you want to create success, you've got to have a good team, and quite often the team will be better than you, but creating the team. And I think it plays into, it cannot just be the leadership team. It goes back to that, why are team leaders sometimes best lawyers? It's because we're appointing the wrong people. So that's my go-to book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a really nice read. It's written as more of a novel than a leadership book, but go-to book. It's what I tell everybody who asks me that question.
Okay, it's a new one on me, so it's on my list.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. You can read it in 2 or 3 days as well. So
yeah, that always helps. So Robert, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks. For people who want to learn more about your work or get in touch, where's the best place for them to find you?
Robert Camp Consulting, if they Google that, or they can email me at robert@robertcamp.co.uk.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So to everyone listening, I hope you found this conversation as helpful and insightful as I have. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it valuable. Thanks again, Robert.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure, Graham.